Yeah. MVP. MVP. When you look back at the season from hell that the Fever had, none of us expected them to be in this situation. None of us expected them to be winning a very close Game 3.
What if I told you that Caitlin Clark might actually suit up for the WNBA Finals? I know, it sounds impossible, right? For weeks, we've been told her season was over. The groin injury was supposed to sideline her for good, and the Fever were left to fight without their superstar. But now, thanks to a little-known rule hidden in the WNBA system, there just might be a pathway, however slim, for Clark to return if Indiana makes it to the league's biggest stage. Imagine it. The most talked about player in women's basketball stepping back on the floor under the brightest lights. That's not just a storyline. That's the kind of twist that changes everything. But here's the reality. It's complicated. The rules, the risks, the roster moves, they're all intertwined. Some people see it as a total long shot. Others believe the loophole was designed for moments exactly like this that S.O. today. We're breaking it all down. What the rule actually says, why the Fever may have left themselves an opening, and what Clark's return would mean for Indiana's chances at a championship. Let's start with the basics. Nobody had Indiana pegged for this. At the start of the year, most analysts didn't even have the Fever making the playoffs. They were young, inconsistent, and banged up. When Caitlin Clark went down, everyone assumed the season was finished. But something wild happened. Instead of folding, the Fever found themselves. They clawed their way into the semifinals and now sit just one step from the finals. Think about what that means. Aaliyah Boston has embraced a bigger role, stepping up as the anchor inside. Kelsey Mitchell has been on fire, carrying stretches of the offense. Veterans like Natasha Howard and Odyssey Sims have been the steadying forces this team desperately needed. And even Sophie Cunningham, who many wrote off, has brought grit and toughness on both ends. This group have become the very definition of resilience. They've won games they had no business winning. They've stood tall when it looked like they'd crumble. And now, with the finals in reach, fans can't help but ask, if they've come this far without Caitlin Clark, what happens if they get her back? The answer: scary, because with Clark in uniform, Indiana's ceiling doesn't just rise, it blows wide open to S.O. Let's rewind. Caitlin Clark hasn't played since suffering that groin injury weeks ago. The Fever quickly announced she'd miss the rest of the regular season, and most people assumed the playoffs too. Groin injuries are tricky. Sometimes they heal in 2 weeks, sometimes they linger for months. Clark only got about 13 games into her rookie season, which was shocking considering how much hype surrounded her debut. She was supposed to take the league by storm, and for a while, she did. Indiana was selling out arenas. TV ratings were breaking records. Suddenly, the Fever weren't just another team. They were the must-watch show in women's basketball, but here's where it gets interesting. Most groin injuries heal somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks depending on severity. We're now well beyond that timeline. Clark has had time to heal, time to train, and maybe even time to prepare behind the scenes. Which raises the obvious question. If she's healthy enough, why not bring her back? And this is where the conversation shifts from health to rules. Because in the WNBA, it's not just about whether Clark's body is ready. It's about whether the league allows it. Normally, once playoff rosters are submitted, that's it. They're locked. No more hardship signings, no 7A contracts, no last-minute free agents. You ride with what you've got. But there's a catch. The league has a clause that allows teams to activate players who are already under contract but listed as inactive. That means if a player is on maternity leave, suspended, or injured, they can technically be moved to the active roster if a spot opens due to another injury. Guess what? Caitlin Clark fits that description. She's not some random free agent. She's signed. She's under contract. She's part of the Fever organization. That's why people are buzzing. Technically, the Fever could activate her under this rule. Now, before you get carried away, exceptions are rare. The league doesn't just hand them out like candy. But the fact that the language exists means this isn't just a fantasy. There's a real pathway, slim but real, for Caitlin Clark to suit up in the finals even though the roster deadline has already passed. Because it means Caitlin Clark's season might not be fully over. Most fans assumed the injury announcement was final. But under the CBA, as long as you're under contract, you're never completely out of the picture. That's the key difference between being on the active playoff roster and being under team control. A player can sit on the inactive list, but still be eligible for activation under certain conditions. And here's another wrinkle. Indiana only submitted 11 players for their playoff roster. Teams are allowed 12. Why leave one spot open? Some believe it was intentional. Maybe the Fever wanted flexibility. Maybe they were quietly keeping the door cracked open for Clark. If they had no plans at all, why not fill the roster with another depth piece? Instead, they roll with fewer bodies, which makes you wonder, was this a strategic gamble to leave room for their star? Now, let's get real. Even if the rules allow it, the biggest question is whether Caitlin Clark is ready. Playoff basketball isn't light. It's physical, it's fast, and it tests everything you've got. Clark hasn't been practicing full speed with the team. Her conditioning may not be where it needs to be, and the risk of brain injury is very real. But here's the flip side. Even a 60% Caitlin Clark changes the game. Her shooting forces defenses to stretch. Her vision creates opportunities for teammates. Her presence alone lifts the energy of everyone around her. With her on the floor, Indiana's puncher's chance against anyone, including the defending champion Aces, suddenly feels a lot more dangerous. And let's not forget the business side. Caitlin Clark isn't just a player. She's the biggest draw the league has seen in years. Her return to the finals would mean packed arenas, record TV ratings, and headlines across the sports world. The WNBA knows that, which makes this decision even trickier. Do you protect the player's long-term health, or do you lean into the chance for a historic moment? So here's where we land. Technically, Caitlin Clark could return. She's under contract. The Fever left a roster spot open. The rules provide a slim but very real chance. Realistically, it's still a long shot. She hasn't been at full practice. The risks are huge, and the Fever may decide to play it safe rather than gamble on her future. But just the fact that we're even talking about this shows you how much she means to the WNBA. With Clark, everything changes: how teams defend, how fans engage, how the league grows. That if she comes back, it could be one of the most dramatic returns in basketball history. If she doesn't, Indiana can still hold their head high knowing they fought their way to the finals without her. So now I'll throw it to you. If you were the Fever, would you risk it? Would you bring Caitlin Clark back, even at less than 100%, for a shot at history?
When you look back at the season from hell that the Fever had, none of us expected them to be in this situation. None of us expected them to be winning a very close Game 3.
An injured player can remain on the inactive list and still technically be eligible for activation if certain conditions are met. That's an important distinction because it sets the situation apart from hardship or emergency contracts, which automatically expire once the regular season ends. What makes this wrinkle so fascinating is just how rarely it even comes into play. Very few athletes of Caitlin Clark's caliber have ever found themselves in such position. Signed, sidelined by injury, yet still looming as a potential postseason weapon. It's exactly the kind of scenario that forces coaches, executives, and even league officials to pause and think hard if Clark truly has a path to return. What should Indiana do? Do the Fever take the risk and bring her back for the biggest stage, potentially shaking up the delicate balance they built? Or do they stick with the group that carried them this far? That's what makes this clause more than just a quirky technicality. It represents a decision that could completely reshape how the season ends. Of course, the gamble is enormous. Bringing back a star player after a lengthy injury layoff is never simple. The risks are obvious and sobering. Clark may not be in true game shape. She could aggravate her injury under the intense pressure of playoff basketball. Her return could even disrupt the rhythm of a team that has finally clicked after months of grinding. Chemistry is fragile, and the postseason is hardly the time for experiments. But then there's the other side of the equation. Even at 60 or 70% of her full strength, Caitlin Clark is still one of the most dangerous players in the WNBA. Her shooting stretches defenses to their breaking point. Her vision creates open looks that others can't. Her sheer competitive fire lifts teammates in ways that don't always show up on the stat sheet. That kind of presence doesn't just help, it transforms. With Clark on the floor, the Fever instantly gain a puncher's chance against anyone, even the defending champion Las Vegas Aces. She changes the way opponents scheme, the matchups they prepare for, and the respect they give to Indiana. And so the Fever face the toughest possible choice. Do they gamble on their franchise cornerstone for the possibility of a historic run? Or do they protect their long-term future and accept that this year's fight may have to be waged without her? It's the timeless dilemma, short-term glory versus long-term security. Adding another layer of intrigue is a roster decision Indiana made heading into the playoffs. Instead of using the maximum 12-player allotment, they submitted only 11 names. On paper, that's unusual. Why willingly go in shorthanded? Some believe it was a calculated move, a way to preserve flexibility and quietly leave the door open for Clark's potential return. After all, if they had no intention of considering her, wouldn't it make sense to simply sign another depth piece? Instead, they rolled forward with fewer bodies, doubling down on the group they had and, perhaps, leaving space for something bigger. The organization has offered no public explanation, but the optics alone were enough to fuel speculation. The idea that Indiana might deliberately carry fewer players, unless they had a plan in mind, is worth serious thought. If Clark does come back, that empty roster slot suddenly looks less like an odd quirk and more like a subtle, brilliant strategy. And if the Fever shock the league and reach the finals, it could go down as one of the boldest choices in modern WNBA history. Here's the reality, though. Even if the rulebook allows it, the real question is physical readiness. Is Caitlin Clark actually healthy enough to return? Injuries don't vanish overnight, and playoff basketball demands intensity at a level far beyond the regular season. Reports suggest she hasn't been practicing at full speed with the team during this playoff run, which means conditioning could be a major hurdle. Stepping straight into finals minutes would test her body immediately. The risk of re-injury is significant if she's rushed back too soon. And yet, this is Caitlin Clark we're talking about. She thrives under pressure, and she has always been built for the biggest moments. Even if she hasn't been fully integrated into practices, it's hard to imagine she hasn't been training and preparing behind the scenes. If there's even a sliver of opportunity to play, she's going to push for it. For Indiana, the calculus is brutally difficult. They must decide if she's sharp enough, strong enough, and capable of helping more than hurting. If the answer is yes, the Fever suddenly become the most dangerous underdog in years. If the answer is no, it becomes one of the biggest what-ifs the WNBA has ever seen. Injuries don't just vanish overnight, and postseason basketball is a different beast entirely. The pace is faster, the pressure is relentless, and every possession carries the weight of a season. Reports suggest that Caitlin Clark hasn't been practicing at full speed with the Indiana Fever during their playoff run. That alone raises questions. If her conditioning isn't where it needs to be, how would she handle the intensity of finals minutes? The moment she steps on the court, her body would be tested immediately. The risk of re-injury if she comes back too soon is not something anyone can dismiss. But then there's the other side of Caitlin Clark, the side that makes this whole conversation impossible to ignore. She's a competitor unlike anyone else in the league. She thrives on pressure. Big moments have never scared her. They've defined her. Even if she hasn't gone full speed in practice, you could be certain she's been rehabbing, training, and preparing behind the scenes. If there's even the slightest window of opportunity, she'll push herself to take it. That leaves a Fever with a gut-wrenching decision. Is she sharp enough to handle the pace? Is she strong enough to endure the physical toll? Can she step onto the floor and truly elevate the team rather than disrupt the rhythm they've built? If the answer is yes, Indiana suddenly becomes the story of the postseason. If the answer is no, then this goes down as one of the biggest what-ifs in WNBA history. Now imagine, just for a second, that Clark does return in time for the finals. The matchup changes instantly against a powerhouse like the Las Vegas Aces. Without Clark, defenses collapse into the paint, clogging the lanes for Aaliyah Boston and daring Indiana's other guards to make shots.